Wow, this is great. Great turnout. Thanks everybody for joining us over lunch today for the first of our fall series as part of the Online Learning Symposium. I'm going to just say a couple words about our activities here today in terms of, we've got a program where I'm just delighted that our very good friend Daphne Koller, who is president and founder or co-founder of Coursera, is joining us. She'll actually be up on the big screen, but she's here on the little screen here initially. She's going to talk for about 30 or 35 minutes or so, and then our other friend, Mark Zupan, is going to follow that with his experiences on Coursera. Okay? So that's what we have in mind to cover today. I'm going to just spend just a couple slides with a reminder of what we've been doing here at the university as sort of a prelude to Daphne's talk. Believe it or not, it's been a little over a year and a half that we started with Coursera, and in that short amount of time, I think we're on our 13th course, and it's been working tremendously well. I would even if Daphne were not listening to this right now, I would tell you that our experiences with Coursera have been extremely positive in terms of what our experience has been, and as well as our experiences and interaction with Coursera as an organization has been very, very positive, and I'm very grateful, Daphne, for that. We had some goals in terms of experimenting with this kind or this model of online course and online learning. It's very different than what we've been doing in the last, say, 20 years, and it was really important to us to have this opportunity to provide first-hand and direct experience for some of our faculty and our institutions. So that was really an important part of our effort. And lastly, the last sort of two bullets relate to some goals that we hope to get out of this. This idea of using this as a vehicle for outreach and raising awareness of the University of Rochester, and to do so with a really high-quality academic experience. Here's a list of the courses we've offered. Like I said, it's been more than a dozen, and we actually have a couple new ones that are sort of in development, and one will be launched. One new one will be launched in about 2 weeks. Actually, 12 days to be specific.
12 days. Okay. Thanks for the pressure.
As a reminder, you know, significant enrollments across all the courses. I'm not going to go through the details here, but we're seeing a lot of connection to the University of Rochester, and most importantly, if we come back to that idea of raising awareness, you can see sort of course after course after course. The blue on this chart represents someone that's making a connection to the University of Rochester that has never heard of us before. And the red is someone that has heard the name University of Rochester, but really has no other affiliation or relationship whatsoever to the institution. And so if you combine the red and the blue, this is really I would say supportive evidence that this is a vehicle that is helping us reach out to people that weren't connected to the University of Rochester before. We are taking a look at sort of this, how much of this is international. You can see it varies by course, but on average, it's about 2/3 of the students are international. We do track the specific countries where they're coming from, so this is sort of rank ordered by course, and so we're tracking all of this. And even of the domestic students, more than 90% are outside of the state of New York, and so this is not something that is solely just connecting to our friends in, around the city of Rochester. This is really reaching out and helping us connect all of these people. Okay? So with that sort of a little bit of a prelude to Daphne, I'm going to turn it over to you now, Daphne, to pick up on how you see Coursera moving forward. Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Eric?
I think we're good.
Oh, good.
Okay.
We're good, Daphne.
Great. Thank you, Eric, for that introduction. Thank you all for being here and listening to me, even though I had to do this remotely. And let me just start out by echoing from the other side Eric's comment. It's been an absolute delight to work with the University of Rochester. We have gotten some amazing courses that have transformed transform the lives of many learners, and we're really happy to continue this partnership going forward. So some of my comments will also later on echo some of the points that Eric made, so you'll see it from both sides. So let me start by talking a little bit about why we believe we have now transcended beyond the initial experiments of 2012 into something that is a real movement. So the experiment actually started out in September 2011, so it's really less than 3 years old if you think about it. October of 2011 is when the first courses launched. We realized that this experiment gave us a tremendous opportunity to affect significant change in the world, and so in January 2012 we spun this out of Stanford. Launched in April of 2012, we had at that point 4 university partners, 37 courses, and 200,000 learners. Fast forward 2.5 years from that point in April, and here's a relatively recent screenshot. We have 114 partners from over 20 different countries, teaching 770 courses in about 10 different languages. And we're scraping really close to 10 million learners. So that's a long way in 2.5 years. So let me show some numbers that are sort of indicative of just how much learning that corresponds to. We've offered, our partners have offered via the Coursera platform over 1,500 sessions. There's been 100 million hours of videos watched. 51 million quizzes have been submitted, and 1.5 million courses have been completed by learners. So an awful lot of learning. So I'm going to talk very briefly about 3 things, structured as 3 questions. What are these courses? Who is taking them, and why are we doing this? And I'm going to go through the what part relatively quickly because given the involvement that Rochester has had in Coursera, I'm sure a lot of this is familiar territory. So very quickly, the nice thing about online content is that you're no longer shackled by the constraints of in-classroom teaching. So you can do short modular videos in a whole range of different formats that transcend lecture capture from the back of the classroom and really allow for significant faculty innovation. The integration of in-video quizzes allows the lectures themselves to be not only short but much more interactive. These in-video quizzes, which pause the lecture in the middle, can be used both for straight content retention questions but also for things that are more survey-like to give people a feel of the overall sense of the community, worldwide community in which they're participating. Now, of course, the video lecture is only a small part of the experience. A big part is the exercises, the homeworks that allow students to engage meaningfully with the material. So in order to do this in a scalable way that provides students with meaningful feedback about their learning, we've implemented 2 at-scale grading technologies. The first of those is auto-grading, which fortunately now can be done across a lot more than just multiple choice, including things like computer programs, computer models, math expressions, and so on. Now, it turns out that our instructors have been very creative about how they leverage this technology. So one of my favorite examples of many is Professor Mike Schass from Georgia Tech, who teaches a class called Introductory Physics 1 with Laboratory. How do you teach a lab class when people, by and large, don't have access to a lab? So Mike decided to innovate. He had the students do the experiments in their own environment with actual objects, like balls and tables and such, the experiment using their cell phone. And then he developed some image processing software that tracked the objects in the video, computed accelerations and velocities, and used that to be able to assess whether the students actually performed the experiment correctly. And so this is a really nice use of the auto-grading technology to really experiment in at-scale teaching. Now, this story has a part 2, which I'll come to at the very end of the lecture. So it's a cliffhanger. Nice thing about auto-graded assessments is they provide you with immediate feedback, so that it allows the students who don't succeed the first time around to realize quickly that they're not getting the material and try again and hopefully achieve mastery before they move on to the next topic. This is in contrast to traditional grading methodologies where sometimes it's 3 or 4 weeks before a student gets his graded homework back and realizes that they're not really getting it, at which point it's often too late for them to recover. A second at-scale grading technology that we've developed is intended for the more open-ended critical thinking type work that currently computers are unable to assess. Here, for example, is a medical case study example from Johns Hopkins University. And in this case, the peer assessment methodology basically leverages crowdsourcing. We have learners who, as they submit their work, are given a set of criteria that tell them how to assess the work of others, and they provide critical feedback on the work of 5 other learners. And as a consequence, receive 5 pieces of feedback on their own. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that it's not only a useful methodology for at-scale grading, it's also useful from a pedagogical perspective. We hear consistently from learners that they learn as much or more from having to think critically about the work of their peers as they do from doing the work on their own in the first place. And in many cases, the instructors ask them to come back and do a self-assessment on their own work at the end, which really allows them to think in depth about how they might have done their work better. And it's a really valuable learning experience. It also provides us with the opportunity to do at-scale courses of types that you would not think can be done in a MOOC. So here, for example, is a design class from the from Wharton Business School at the University of Pennsylvania, and it's an 8-week project course. It starts out from a problem definition, a concept, a prototype, an artifact, and each stage is graded by a peer assessment, and as such provides a really meaningful experiential learning opportunity to students all around the world. This really leads naturally to another important component of the learner interaction in these MOOCs, which is the social component. The community that is provided is worldwide and allows learners to engage with people from all sorts of different cultures, socioeconomic backgrounds and experiences, and provides an incredibly rich learning experience for both the students in the class, but also for the instructor, him or herself. And often we hear from instructors that this really helped reshape and inspire the way they think about their teaching and their research because of the diversity of perspectives that they were exposed to. The final part of the experience is the verified certificate, which is our way of also achieving sustainability as well as for providing value to learners. So this is for those people who care about credentialing because it is useful for them in, for instance, job search. We have the opportunity to identity verify and earn what we call verified certificate, or VC. And you can see that when we first started this in early 2013, the uptake on it was relatively low because it didn't have a lot of credence in the marketplace. Nobody knew what it was. But now we're getting to the point that between 20 and 25% of course completers earn a verified certificate, and many of them post the credential on LinkedIn. Now, this is actually, I think, a low bound on how far we can get because several experiments that we've done recently have significantly increased the uptake of verified certificates. So, for example, we've recently experimented with geo-pricing, where we reduced the cost of these certificates considerably in parts of the world where per capita income is low, and that translated, as you would expect, to considerably higher conversions into the verified certificate. But what's also interesting is it also ended up increasing the revenue because the price reduction was more than compensated by the increase in the number of people who were interested in this. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity here to grow these numbers even larger, and effectively provides us and our partners with a mechanism by which we can make free education sustainable, because this is entirely an optional add-on. That is, the learning is and will continue to be free. Recently, we've started to experiment with something that actually puts all these different elements together, and these are larger units of learning, which we call a specialization. A specialization is a multi-course sequence. Here's an example of a specialization from Maryland and Vanderbilt on programming in Android. It's a 3-course sequence followed by a final project. The final project is something that allows the learners who completed all of those 3 courses successfully to demonstrate that they can apply the skills that they learned in the context of a real-world problem. This is an incredibly valuable opportunity for a lot of learners. They find the certificate that they get for this larger unit of learning to be a much more meaningful value in the workplace than just for a single course, and yet it's considerably smaller and more targeted than, say, a full-scale master's degree, and as such opens up a whole new audience to continuing education programs. And so we think this is an incredibly, that's why the uptake on this has been incredibly high. And specifically coming back to verified certificates, we find that for the same course, when it was offered when it's offered in a specialization and prior to that was offered not as part of the specialization, the conversion rates into the verified certificate are about 2 to 4x what they were before, demonstrating the value that this has to learners. So that's the first part. It's a very, very brief overview of what these courses are like and what these educational offerings are like. The next thing I'd like to talk about is for our learners, what are they looking to get and how can we serve them? And this is a distillation of several years worth of data now about our learner demographics. So first of all, our learners come about 1/3 each. This is specific with numbers that Eric reported. 1/3 from the US, 1/3 from other developed economies like Europe or Australia, and 1/3 from emerging economies. We're actually very proud of the fact that we have 1/3 of our learners come from developing countries. And this is not just the ones you would expect, India and China. We actually have learners from every single country in the world, including North Korea, as well as everything else. And a good proportion, a good representation from countries like Mexico, Nigeria, South Africa, so very broad representation around the globe. That global reach has been increasing in all countries of the world, and so here's a graph of learning growth in different countries. It shows every country, it shows the top 2 countries except for the US. The US is the top, so we just push down the graph. But I'd like to point out an interesting thing here. You see India, you see China, UK, Brazil. There's an interesting kink in the curve in the China graph that happened in October 2013, so exactly a year ago. This is when we did our China launch, in which we created a whole range of translated content. That is, we translated a good number of our English-speaking courses into Chinese, acquired some top-notch Chinese partners like Beidad, Fudan, and Shanghai Jiaotong, who are producing a lot of Chinese language content. Distribution partnerships, hosting of content behind the firewall, and as a consequence, whereas the year-on-year growth on the entire Coursera platform in that 1-year span has been 85%, which is pretty good, in China it's been 330%. So we're very happy with that because it's not just that the Chinese market is very important for all of us, it's also that it was an example of a successful intervention, which we have now recently done in Brazil with our recent Brazil launch with the top 2 Brazilian universities, University of Sao Paulo and Unicamp, and now we've seen a similar spike in the Brazil enrollments, so now it's actually, it's moved past the UK as our 3rd largest non-US market. This was done by a combination of different things. First of all, by an extensive localization and translation effort into multiple different languages. So specifically, we have launched in April 2014, 6 months ago, the Global Translation Community. This has over 40,000 volunteer translators who are learners in our courses who basically just want to give something back. So grateful for the opportunity they were provided, and they just want to give something to other learners in their country. Several thousand of them are active at any point in time, and as a consequence, we produced in just those 6 months over 140 course translations which we could just not have afforded to do using paid translation mechanisms. And what we find, and you can see that in the bar chart on the left, that translating even just the subtitles leads to an over 3x increase in enrollments within the target language group, consistently in all courses. And this is a very exciting development. We actually have done one experiment with full course translation that included the assessments and announcements, and we saw not a 3x increase, but a 6x increase. And so we're now experimenting with full course translation into Chinese, and if that turns out to be successful, we'll do that across more courses in more languages. The last thing that we've done in order to increase access is to work with a number of partners in order to create a network of what we call Coursera learning hubs. These are small private spaces administered by one of our partners where people come together to form a study group that's facilitated by a tutor or facilitator. The first one of those was I think at this point we're up to 60 US embassies abroad, often facilitated by an embassy employee. New York Public Libraries is one of our partners. The Slim Foundation with 2,000 digital libraries in Spanish-speaking Latin America and Mexico. So really a way of both solving the last mile problem for people who don't have internet access, but also increasing learning outcomes because that social scaffolding increases completion rates to something that's usually well north of 70%. So now let's talk a little bit about other aspects of our learners besides geographical diversity. Here is a recent learner segmentation that we've done. This is a US-centric approach, but we think the patterns are likely to hold true in other countries as well. You can break down our population into 4 large buckets. The first is people who are currently or would like to be college students. They trend very young, late teens, early 20s, often looking to take core skills courses as a way of either enhancing their existing college education or increasing their chances of being accepted to college. Second large category is enrichment learners. These are the people who typically take the very broad diversity of classes like the history of rock or other similar classes that really appeal, you can see, to a very broad age diversity that goes all the way to the 50s and 60s. The last 2 categories are working professionals who are looking to acquire career skills. They tend to fall currently into 2 large buckets. The first are tech skill builders who are looking to learn new computing skills. And the second are people who are looking to change their career by taking business-oriented courses. And so those are 4 large buckets of learners, but we realize that there's an awful lot of populations that we're not currently hitting, and that's going to be a focus of our efforts in the coming year. One thing that this learner population really gives insight on is the whole notion of retention. This is one of the most often quoted and misunderstood statistics about MOOCs is that, oh, MOOCs can't be any good because only 5 people who begin a MOOC complete the MOOC. Now, even aside from the fact that if you have 100,000 people who began a MOOC and only 5,000 completed, that's still an awfully large number. Even if you leave that aside, what this really fails to understand is that people enroll in a MOOC often for a very different range of intents that are not at all similar to what people are looking to get in a traditional college environment. Most people who sign up for a MOOC are just exploring. They want to find out what this thing is about. Half of those don't even show up on the first day of class because enrollment has no friction, so they don't even watch a single video. Of the ones that do watch a single video, about half realize after doing that this is really not the course they were thinking about. This is not what they were looking for, and they just drop out right there. Of the ones that do stick around, about half, again, are in it only to watch the videos. And they actually, many of them stick through all the way to the end and watch 90% of the videos, but they're just not interested in doing homework. And so when you cite these statistics, all of these are people who go into the denominator, and that's why the number really just doesn't make any sense. Now, if you want to look at it a little bit more deeply, so we already said that about 5% overall complete the course. If you look at people who have made their way 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 3 weeks into the course, and you ask them, are you committed to completing this course now that you know what it's about? This is similar to the college shopping period. About 63% of them end up completing the course of the ones that say they're committed. If they also put in some skin in the game and they actually signed up for the signature track, the verified certificate, completion rates can be much higher than that. And some courses report numbers that are well into the 80s or sometimes even higher. And so this is really a very different perspective of completion than what is typically presented in the media. Now, however, there are still a good number of learners who really do want to complete and are unable to do so. And when we ask them why, the #1 reason is that life got in the way. Deadline at work, a business trip, child got sick, and they missed the deadline and they couldn't re-engage. And so in order to address that issue, we're now shifting our thinking on giving people the flexibility that they need in their lives. And so we are creating a new on-demand platform in which the content is available to anyone at any time. Students can start anytime they're ready. If they want to binge study and have a week vacation, they finish the whole course in a week, that's great. If they need to take 3 months because they're busy at work, that's fine too. And they can basically make the course at their own pace at their own time. We're going to build in a lot of social interactions into this more asynchronous environment where people can engage with learners who happen to be at the same stage of the course that they currently are at. It doesn't matter whether they started at the same time, because when there's 50,000 people, you don't necessarily generate that set of personal connections. But we're also going to create the ability to generate cohorts. These are smaller groups of people who really do walk through this together at this using the same set of deadlines. And those cohorts can be learning hubs, they can be students on your own campus, and this really allows people to have the best of both worlds. A smaller, more tightly-knit community that engages meaningfully with each other, plus the richness of the interaction you get from a global audience. There's currently 7 courses, actually 8 as of this week, that have launched on this platform, and we're hoping to move more and more of the content into this more flexible approach. The last piece of the talk, the why should we all be doing this? I'm going to start from the more pragmatic to the less pragmatic of the why. So the first and most pragmatic, and these are topics that Eric already touched on, is visibility and reach. So here's an interesting anecdote for you. If you look for rock history, this is a pretty generic search term. This is, one that you would expect a lot of people to search for. History of Rock, Part 1 from the University of Rochester shows up, I think, what is it, the 3rd hit on the first page of Google search. Okay? Now, this is not even the exact course title. This is pretty typical for courses that are currently running. They almost invariably, some version of that shows up on the first page. And these are pretty generic search terms. If you see on the left, it's things like financial accounting, data analysis, cryptography, business strategy, algorithms, Roman architecture, and so on are all search terms that give a Coursera partner course on the first page of Google search. So that's a pretty good thing right there. Eric already mentioned these results, so I won't repeat them, but I will just say that the numbers that Eric mentioned are not just unique to Rochester. We see this across the range of partners, where a large majority, in many cases, of learners who take a course have not previously heard of the institutions from which they took the courses. Eric already mentioned the benefits in terms of the intake of applicants into on-campus online programs. Again, this is not unique to Rochester. We hear this from Penn State, from University of London, from Cal Arts, from Edinburgh, from Amsterdam. Is basically a significant influx of high-quality applicants into other follow-on programs from MOOCs. So that was part 1, is visibility and reach. Now let's talk about the impact on learning, which is something that I think we all care about. So there's a number of ways in which teaching a MOOC can help in on-campus teaching. One of those is flipping the classroom, and this is something that we've all heard a lot about. It's the model by which the content is offered to students on your campus, so that they get the content delivery and the basic skills before they come to class, so they can come to class to do something that's much more meaningful, like active learning and problem solving. So that's great. And we see from our instructors a significant interest in having that happen. There's a lot of excitement. Here's Scott Rixner from Rice, who says, I will never, ever, ever teach a class any other way. So I just don't see the point anymore. So this is great for teachers, but it's also great for learners or for students. This is a really interesting study from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, who've actually been flipping the classroom for a decade, long before MOOCs came on the scene. And you can see that the effect here is that students who were in the failing range of the distribution, that long tail, are actually moved over to the passing range. So the failure rate in the flipped classroom has gone down considerably in pretty much every classroom that they've tried this in. Moving on from there, there is the innovation in teaching. This platform and the flexibility of it, and the fact that you can offer short courses and experiment in a less risky place, is really been liberating to a lot of our faculty. And here's an example of a place where that's really translated back. So here is Professor Mike Schass, who we talked about earlier. And one of the things that he tells us is that after his Georgia Tech students found out that these people in the wild were doing the experiments, not in a sterile physics lab, but in basketball courts, all of them wanted to do the same thing. And so now his Georgia Tech students don't go into the lab anymore. They do the experiments in places that are much more meaningful to their day-to-day lives, and they come into class to discuss how they did their experiments and be critiqued by their peers. And he says they're considerably more engaged now than they were before. And this translates into better instructor satisfaction. So John, I know John should be there in the audience. Hey, John. Says this has got to rank as close to the top of the most satisfying teaching experiences I've ever had. And this, of course, is demonstrated by the fact that I think you're getting into your 11th or 12th offering of your courses, John. This is pretty impressive. So finally, coming to experimentation and teaching, I think there is a real exciting aspect going on in terms of the use of big data in teaching. So one of the things that you get from this is that learning, in the words of one of our instructors from the University of Virginia, is often a black box in the classroom. MOOCs allow us to see what students are doing. With hundreds of thousands of students, if there's a correlation to be found, we'll find it. So in order to leverage that, we've recently put in place some very detailed data analytics that can really allow an instructor to drill in to the specifics of their course and see what's working and what's not. Here's an example from actually my colleague Andrew Ng's machine learning class. Had 4 variants that were randomly selected of what he thought were the same question. And some students got one and some students got the other. When you look at the actual data, you see, however, that 2 of the questions had an almost random correct rate, because it's a 2-choice question, whereas 2 of them had an almost perfect score, indicating that 2 of them are probably not equivalent to the other 2. And now Andrew can go back and say, what is different about these 2 and what did I not teach well, so that I can get people to do better on these 2 variants as well. And so the nice thing about this, especially in the on-demand universe, is that if you create a course that is intended, say, for your on-campus students, you teach it as a MOOC, you have multiple iterations, multiple opportunities to see what's wrong, fix it, see if it fixes the problem. So by the time your next on-campus course comes back up, all of a sudden your course is so much better than it was the first time. And so it's a real opportunity for innovation in teaching. The last piece of the talk, and the last piece of why, is reminding ourselves of the transformative impact that this can have on the lives of our learners. I could give literally hundreds of examples of places where this has made a dramatic impact. I'm going to give just 2, so that we have some time for Q&A. This is Sharmeen from Bangladesh, who is a social activist. She wanted to save girls from the indentured servitude, which is so common in Bangladesh. Convinced a friend to run away with her, they opened a bakery. Neither of them knew how to run a business. The bakery was about to fail. She started by taking an economics course from Penn. She heard about this opportunity. She took an economics course, then one from Michigan, and then courses from Michigan and Irvine and Penn and Wharton and so on. And now she knows how to run a business, and her bakery is earning not $900 a month, but $5,000 a month. And Charmaine tells us that this has allowed her to hire not just her 1 friend, but 5 other women. So now the 7 of them are living off the proceeds of the bakery, and all of them are also taking other Coursera classes
to help them make a better life for themselves. The second story is closer to home. This is Scotty from Louisiana. He's a 47-year-old undergraduate student. Scotty was a star student in high school, got a full scholarship to UT Austin, was unable to take it because he had to work to support his family. Was working a menial job, living from paycheck to paycheck when he was laid off. He was living in his car. He lost his wife, he lost custody of his 13-year-old daughter, and then managed to work his way out of that. And when he did that, he said, I'm never going to have this happen again. And so he said, I started thinking about going to school, and it was a little frightening. I had a total of 6 college credits to my name and had not seen the inside of a classroom in almost 30 years. I thought maybe an online environment would be less intimidating. So he took the University of Michigan course on Internet History and Technology and gained confidence in his ability to become a successful student, went back to an actual undergraduate degree, and in April was named Outstanding Sophomore of the Year and was inducted into the International Honor Society for Psychology. So these are just 2 examples of many of the impact that your courses have had on people everywhere. So the last slide is really just taking a step back and thinking about education and where it's going. One of our instructors, Christian Turwish, has analyzed MOOCs from an operations management perspective. He teaches the operations management course on Coursera. And he says that education is by nature a trade-off along a Pareto optimal curve between how faculty productivity, how many people you can teach in an hour, and students' learning outcomes. So a large lecture hall has pretty decent productivity. You can put 400 people in there, but the learning outcomes are so-so. Like in office hours, has great learning outcomes, but the faculty productivity is pretty abysmal. He says that MOOCs give us a new frontier, and it's up to us how to leverage this. We can take quality of instruction that we put in that large lecture hall, maybe even better a little bit because of the flexibility, and increase the productivity considerably. And offer it not to a few hundred learners, but to a few 100,000 people. Or you can take the same amount of time that faculty currently spend in developing content and grading homework, and instead use that to flip the classroom and engage in much more meaningful ways with our students and significantly improve learning outcomes. So these are just two of the points on this new curve, and it's really up to us to figure out who we want to reach and how we best leverage this technology to transform the lives of students both on our campuses and outside. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Daphne. I think we should take, I'm sensitive to time and schedule. I want to save some time for Mark here as well. But why don't we take a question or 2 from the audience? Does anybody have anything for Daphne?
Did she ever plan to offer that framework for pay? You know, where an institution could charge using that framework, or will that never happen?
Daphne, can you hear the question okay?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
This has been a sticking point for us because we feel that it's, it doesn't align ideally with our mission of offering free education. We also believe that it's not clear that it's to the benefit of the institution because there is a very large top of the funnel. What we typically encourage institutions to do is to think about value-added services that sit on top of open content. So you offer an open course, but you have additional assessments, higher levels of engagement with the faculty, and a closed form that sits on top of that. Things like that are sort of still provide a lot of the content to the people who can't afford those extra services, but provide additional revenue opportunities. That having been said, we know a lot of our partners have been requesting this ability to offer closed courses, and this is something that we're currently thinking about. So if that's, we can have a conversation about that if that's of significant interest.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Another question?
How difficult is it for a faculty member to convert their course to an online course? through Coursera.
Daphne, did you hear the question?
No, not this time, sorry.
Okay, it's okay. So the question had to do with your sense of the challenge or difficulty for a faculty member to convert their course to the Coursera platform.
You know, it's a fair bit of work. I don't want to lie to you. Your colleagues will be able to tell you that. For an 8 to 10 week course, we find that it's about 200 hours of work from beginning to end, and that includes a lot of the instructional design of how to take the content and conceptualize it in this new framework, the design of assessments that can be graded at scale, and so on and so forth. We're currently actually recommending 4-week courses as being a better match to learner interests. They find that 10 weeks is too large of a commitment for a working adult, and so that would more than halve that time, so it would be more like, 80 to 100 hours, I think. So it's still a non-trivial amount of work, but it does amortize across multiple offerings of the class. It amortizes across on-campus and off-campus offerings. It does actually significantly decrease the workload if it's then used in a flipped classroom model because of the auto-grading of the assessments and the ability to target one's teaching to the specific needs of the students. And so there is a very big upfront investment, but I think it pays for itself over time.
All right, one last question.
One other. If my course has ever been offered on Coursera, why should I ever do anything about it? It's already been offered, it's already been done. Is there any opening for me to do one, or do I have to find something that's totally unique?
You mean done by somebody else, right?
Correct, correct.
We've had a number of pairs or even triples. We have 3 micro-econ classes, 2 social networking classes. People respond well to having choices. Not everyone's style, instructor style resonates with all of the learners in the same way that you have multiple textbooks for the same discipline. So I think it's useful if you're teaching a course that's a version of which has already been offered to look at it and see how yours might be distinguished in either the level or the coverage of the topics or even just the style and the examples and so on. But I would be surprised if, given where we currently are, that a course that the one course at most that's been offered is just so close to what you would do that there's no value in what you're teaching.
All right, that's great. I'm gonna again be sensitive to time. Let me just sign off with Daphne and just say how much we appreciate you joining us here today. Again, we've really appreciated the opportunity to work with you personally as well as your team, and thank you very much for coming in even this way with us.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for allowing me to come in this way. My apologies for the technical difficulties.
All right. Thanks, Daphne.
Thanks, Derek. Bye.